With that music of astonishing originality and emotional intensity, Richard Wagner irrevocably changed the course of musical history. The Prelude to Tristan and Isolde caused total consternation and incomprehension among many who heard it at its first performance in 1860. And we're not just talking here about conservative listeners. These were musicians of sophistication and professional know-how. Here's Berlioz, for instance. I have read this strange passage over and over again, and I have listened to it with the greatest concentration and a strong desire to discover its meaning. But I'm afraid I must confess that I've not the slightest idea of what it's all about. If a modernist of Berlioz's visionary capacity couldn't understand this music, there was clearly a very serious obstacle. Wagner began composing his opera Tristan and Isolde in 1857, and he completed it within 2 years, but it was to be a further 6 years before it received its first staging. So Wagner concocted the concert excerpt, which we now know as the Prelude and Liebestod, to whet people's appetites. It was a summary of the work's dramatic and musical content, its opening and closing music. That dramatic, and indeed psychological content, compelled Wagner to invent a virtually new musical language. It embodied an unfulfilled erotic longing of almost unbearable proportions. And where better to start than at the very beginning with probably the most famous chord progression in the history of music. Encapsulated by that haunting motive are the two musical processes which so mystified and confounded early audiences. The first is a refusal to cadence and so establish or confirm a key. The second is Wagner's daring use of ambiguous harmonies. Given that by a miraculous feat of concentration he sustained this kind of writing for well over 4 hours, you can imagine how incomprehensible, even irritating, many listeners found it. Coming to a cadence provides breathing space and a sense of fulfillment. Here was music that practically never did that. And the ambiguity meant the music never seemed to move in a predictable way. What exactly is this ambiguity? Listen first to this tried and trusted way of establishing a key. It can be heard time and again in 19th century music. Here it is, establishing A minor. Now decorate that passage in a time-honoured way by including passing notes to bridge the gaps between the chords. From there, it's only a short step to substituting those notes for the notes they were linking. If we also remove the final chord to give Wagner's progression its intended effect, we get this astonishing result. So, the first of these two chords can be construed as a variation of one traditionally found in A minor, but it's been so radically transformed it actually sounds as if it belongs to a totally different key. In fact, it could belong to a number of different keys. Here it is in E flat minor. That's an implication which Wagner makes the most powerful use of at the climax of the prelude. Now here it is in C minor. And it can also belong to F sharp major, and that's an implication Wagner picks up at the end of the opera, 4 hours later. You can now begin to see what I meant by the chord's ambiguity. Wagner uses such implications continuously to build his labyrinthine harmonic progress, hinting at tonal areas, rarely establishing them, and moving on before we can work out where we've got to. It's a miraculously precise analogy for the way half-formed feelings and impressions float across our minds, and of the sheer psychological complexity of our emotional lives, where nothing is quite as it seems. I said just now, hinting at tonal areas, but rarely establishing them. You establish keys by sounding a firm cadence. Wagner continually avoids them. He simply leaves the music hanging in mid-air. Now here's the wonderful theme that follows the introduction. It's more connected, more continuous, less painfully chromatic, yet it still keeps fulfillment at bay, and constantly confounds our expectations. After the total lack of full cadences in the opening paragraph, we might be forgiven for thinking that here, at last, we're going to land unequivocally in A minor. But no. The cadence was interrupted, and we now move on towards C major. But just on the point of establishing C, the music vacillates and turns towards yet another key. At last, a stable chord, a chord of D minor, and for a bar or so, Wagner sounds as if he's going to make a firmer commitment to that key. But no, he moves on again, this time towards E minor, before yet again turning aside. So,